Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. I'm Diana. So I want to ask a question. Are you the inheritor of one of your grandmother or an aunt or your mother's beautiful patchwork quilts? Or maybe you've inherited a big pile of blocks, patchwork blocks, and you're wondering to yourself, what do I do with these? Can I use this quilt? Can I curl up under it to watch a movie on a Friday night? What do I do with these blocks? How do I preserve them? How do I wash them? Can I wash them? What do I store them in? Well, stick with me today because that's what today's video here at Sew in Common is all about. How to do a little preservation for our heirloom and vintage quilts, what to do with those blocks that we might find ourselves with. And even if you are a quilter yourself and you've been quilting for a while, someday your quilts will become vintage and heirloom as well, and you might have a stack of blocks you never got around to. So here is also some tips and tricks to help you make sure that all of those things are preserved well for whoever is going to have them in the future, whether it's a family member, a best friend, anything like that. So let's get started. Okay, everybody, you can see right here, I've got this gorgeous Grandma's Flower Garden blanket quilt. It is over 55 years old now, and it is the first quilt that I ever helped my grandmother create. Now, I want to show you something that I didn't do. This whole quilt has this beautiful scalloped edge on it. My grandmother was an amazing quilter. Truly an exceptional artist in her own right. And I used to beg her to teach me how to quilt. And the one thing I loved about her quilts are, look at all these colors. I mean, every color in the rainbow on this quilt. But as a 55-year-old quilt, it's now considered heirloom. What is an heirloom or a vintage quilt? Well, I was fortunate growing up that my parents lived next door to the most lovely couple who owned their own antique store. And so they taught me a great deal about what is vintage, what is antique, what is heirloom. So some people will tell you that an heirloom quilt is anything over 25 years old. That's not quite right. A 25-year-old quilt is certainly vintage, okay, and should be taken, have the utmost care taken with it for preservation long term, of course. But I have 25-year-old quilts that we still use. This quilt, 55 plus years old, I still use. There's nothing more that I love than to curl up on my favorite chair or on the sofa with a book or to watch a movie with this quilt, just me and this quilt, because when I'm wrapped up in this quilt, I'm wrapped up in my grandma's arms, and I love it. So this quilt was all done with paper piecing, English paper piecing, and I'm a lefty, and I was horrible at it. In fact, some of my stitches in some of these flowers was horrendous, and I almost never became a quilter because of it, but my grandmother had really great patience and just kept encouraging me, walking me through things step by step. So although I did not make this entire quilt by any means, several of the flowers in here I pieced, so it is technically my first quilt, but I made it with my grandmother, which makes it extra special. But at 55 plus years old, this is considered an heirloom quilt. Anything 50 years and older is definitely heirloom. So there are some things you should try and find out about your quilt, or you might already know about your quilt. Today, we're really good about making quilt labels, and we'll talk more about that later in the video. But back when my grandmother and I made this together, quilt labels didn't really exist. So I know about it, and I've written down everything I know about it so that someday, if a niece or a nephew of mine inherits this from me, they will know that their great-grandmother or their great-grandmother and their aunt or their great-aunt, what we did, what these fabrics mean. Some of these were sundresses, some of these were just solid yardage that we were able to find at the time. Some of them are old flour sacks. I mean, there's all kinds of fabric in here, all cotton at the time. But there's just a little bit of everything, and you can really tell, you can see it's all hand quilted, all hand stitched. There was no machine working stuff back then. Aren't we lucky today that we can piece our quilts on our embroidery machine like we do here at Sew & Common, or use our sewing machine, or still use the older form of doing it by hand. I still occasionally love to sit down and do a little hand quilting. Not so much hand piecing, because as a lefty, my hand stitches still don't look the best in the world. But we're so fortunate to have machines that we can do a lot of this on, which makes our quilts no less beautiful, no less wonderful, no less valuable, okay? So as a 55-year-old quilt, this is definitely heirloom. I know things about it, and I've written it down. So I know these are cottons. I know that we used a cotton batting. I know that we just used a muslin on the back of it for our backing fabric. Those things I've written down so that someday when somebody inherits this from me, they will be able to, if they're taking it to someone to preserve, although I plan to have these preserved as well as I can, if they take it to someone for preservation or to have it looked at to see if there's anything that should be done to it at the time, they'll have that information for the preservationist. Okay, that's important. If you don't know any of that information, say you just know this was from your grandmother, then write down your grandmother's name. If you know roughly when she might have created the quilt, write that down. If you think that she probably used all cotton, and probably she did, cotton, unless it's something called a crazy quilt, which could have velvet and other things on it. I have an heirloom quilt from my husband's great-grandmother that's made from wool army blankets. So I know it's all wool. So depending on the fabrics, there are different ways you can treat them for preservation, especially when it comes to cleaning. Anything this old never ever goes in a washing machine. It never ever really goes in my tub to be tub washed any longer either. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but there are some techniques that I can use to kind of spot clean. But because of this being older, an heirloom level, I don't do that kind of washing on it. Because fabric over time, especially cotton and muslin, which is typically a cotton, will deteriorate over time. Now, you can preserve these and they're going to last a really, really, really long time. But over millennia of time, fabric like cotton will wear away because it's a plant fiber. That's what cotton is. So at this point, with anything in that heirloom category, no machine washing. In fact, anything 25 years and older, no machine washing. The way our fabrics are made today is a completely different and a much better process because we know more about doing those kinds of things. So like the quilts I make today, I will tub wash. Or if it's a panel quilt, like you can kind of see this one here is a part panel quilt, part pieced. It's a lap quilt. It's kind of a wall hanging as well that I made for my husband. Those I will throw in my washer on the very lightest setting I can. It's the agitation that can cause problems. But only panel quilts because they have very little piecing in them. Anything that is a fully pieced quilt just gets tub washed, and we'll talk more about that in a little while too. Water temperature, that kind of thing. And we're also going to talk more about how you store your quilts. This one gets laid across the back of the sofa or on the bed because laying them flat is always better than rolling or folding. Folding is the last thing I want to do. Rolling is how I store many of my quilts, but the best way to store them is on a bed that you're not using, just flat. My grandmother used to have a spare bed, and I swear it was only for her quilts, because her quilts would be 12 or 20 quilts deep. Not because she needed them for warmth, but because that's the best way to store them flat, because they're not getting wrinkles in them. Wrinkles over time, just kind of like with our skin, those are the places where things start to thin out and wear away. So laying them flat is really great, but we'll go into more of that as well. Now, if you are just starting your quilt journey, you have nothing that is older, remember, someday your quilts will become those heirloom quilts, those vintage quilts. And so learning how to properly preserve and store your quilts now are really going to help you. And I also have a stack of very special quilt blocks that I want to share with you under another camera, because I want you to see them more close up. It'll help us talk more about the preservation process and more about like what we can do with those types of blocks. Can we still make those into quilts? What happens if I get a quilt and it has a hole in it? What can I do at that point? Can that still be fixed? All of those things. We're going to continue to talk about those in the studio and under another camera where we can look at things more close up. So come with me now while we do that. Hi everybody. So we're back here in the studio now, and so I've got lots of info and tips to share with you all. So you might want to get a paper, a pen, and your quilting notebook if you have like a little notebook like this, or you know, a steno pad, maybe anywhere where you keep your quilting information notes. You might want to grab that and a pen or pencil, or like I like to use these little flare markers. They're just my favorites. Been using them for years, like since the 60s. So I just keep using them. Luckily, they keep making them, right? Alrighty. So what did you think of my quilt? Isn't it beautiful? It is beautiful to me. To me, that quilt, most beautiful quilt in the world, means so much. So I have lots of little things that I can share with you now. So why don't we start? I'm looking over here at my notes for a moment to see where I want to go first. All right, so we talked briefly about washing vintage and heirloom quilts, or any quilt really. I really find what I call tub washing, meaning in the bathtub. So I make sure my bathtub is clean, put a stopper in it, and I use a lukewarm water. Okay, not even close to being hot, not cold, just that lukewarm, like you've left your iced tea sitting out in the sunshine and the ice melts and it gets a little warm, about that temperature. You know, in the old days when we used to sprinkle baby's bottle milk onto your wrist to see if it was the right temperature, that kind of a thing. That's what you're looking for. So a lukewarm water, and my favorite product is good old-fashioned ivory snowflakes. I put about half a cup or so in the water, or a cup. I don't get suds and stuff. I'm not looking for suds. And then I lay the quilt in there and I let it soak for a little while. I don't agitate. Agitation for vintage and heirloom quilts, or even our modern quilts, is the enemy. Okay, because all that agitation roughs up our seams, and it over time will weaken the fibers of the fabric and your thread. And it's also not good for the batting in there. It will eventually start to make the batting degrade more. So no agitation. That's why I say, please, for heaven's sakes, do not use your washing machine. Even our modern washing machines that have the gentle, delicate cycle like you would with hand-washed wools. Nah, no. Tub washing if you have to wash. Now, I will say this. If you have a real heirloom quilt that is, you know, we're past the 25-year mark, right? We're heading down the highway with that quilt. Don't wash it. Don't ever dry clean it. Those chemicals will ruin those old fibers at this point. If you're worried about cleaning it, take it to a preservationist. That's someone like me. And I can look at it. Your preservationist can look at it and decide what to do with it. A lot of times, a little like Q-tips and stuff, I can spot clean little places on older quilts. A lot of times they don't really need washing. They just need a little bit of freshening up. And sometimes freshening up can just be letting them air. Okay. So if you have to wash, so modern quilts, like I said, I do put my panel quilts, if they don't have a lot of extra patchwork on them, I will put them in my washer on my very gentlest, no agitation kind of thing. And then I will lay them flat to dry. Always lay my quilts flat to dry. Or if I have a nice summer day where the sun isn't too direct and too hot, for my modern quilts, I'll throw them over a clothesline and I'll let them dry outside. I no longer will let my vintage or heirloom quilts go outside. I'm going to, excuse me, just one second. I am turning down my front door camera because I have something being delivered here in a little bit and I don't want it going off and messing up our sound. So older quilts, don't put them out in the sun anymore. That brings me to the idea of, do you ever retire a quilt? Now that quilt, you saw it. Did you see how vibrant my colors still were? That's because when that quilt isn't being used, it's in the dark. And that leads me to this: storage temperature and humidity. Now this is getting into like some real nitpicky stuff for preservation. This is the kind of stuff that preservationists do for museum things. But if it can be in a museum, that's how I want to treat my own quilts too. So storage temp, 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit and about 50% humidity. This right here is a large enclosed closet that I can control temperature and humidity in. So that's where the quilts get stored for the most part. And I roll mine. When you roll a quilt, you need to roll it in either muslin or tissue paper, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. You'll roll them, and I roll them on, I used to roll them on pool noodles until I realized that pool noodles, because they are polypropylene kind of foam, off gas. Boy, was I like, oh my gosh, that's not good for fabric. So I have taken to rolling mine on nothing. I just roll them. They're just a roll, like you would roll a carpet, but they have muslin and or an acid-free tissue paper. And acid-free tissue papers are not made equal. I'll share my favorite place to get mine here in a moment, and I'll link it in the description below. So I just roll them, and then they're laid on long shelves right behind me. Okay. And that quilt that you saw out there, that's why at almost 60 years old, over 55 years, it's between that 55 and 60 year mark. And I'm not going to tell you how many, because if I do, and you know that I started quilting when I was 7, you'll figure out how old I am. And there's a commercial, she says her age is unlisted. Yeah, my age is unlisted. My grandma always thought her age should be unlisted too. So anyway, but for that quilt, that's why those colors are still bright and beautiful. It's because it's been stored properly. And when I use it, I don't eat on it. If I need to have a snack during my movie time or something, then I grab one of my many throw quilts that I make that anybody can grab in the living room and snuggle up in. If I need to wash them, I'll wash them. Okay. So that's just for me to relax, calm, read, watch a movie by myself. And my husband says, yeah, he doesn't even get to touch it. He can touch it, but he has to have clean hands first. And that's the other thing. Wash your hands when you're using your quilts. That's the other thing. We're started our quilt along now. And part of it, I tell you, have some snacks ready. But seriously, if you're going to snack, wash your hands before you go touching your stuff. You'll get salt on them. You'll get oil on them. You'll get chocolate on them. You'll get sticky stuff on them. That will all transfer to the fabric. So snacks should be kept, in my opinion, to a minimum. As long as I have a cup of coffee and a bottle of water, I'm usually good. And I don't drink the coffee by my fabric ever. So that is your storage temp and humidity level. And again, for vintage and heirloom, no direct sunlight or heat. Don't put these someplace where the heat register is going to be blowing up underneath and getting those quilts warm. That can also damage your fiber. It'll dry it out over time, and that will weaken the fibers. No direct sunlight anymore. My quilts now that I make, we know that the fabric's more color fast. It's made to be more color fast. It's made with newer techniques. So yeah, we take them out and put them on the lawn and let the nieces and nephews picnic and all that kind of stuff. We picnic on them, but not vintage or heirloom. So the idea of retiring your quilt, you might want to think about it. Or bring one out like I do mine that I made with my grandma. Occasionally. And when you're not using it, make sure it's properly stored and put away. To go back to what we were discussing earlier about documentation, document the history of your quilt as much as possible. Keep it in a notebook. What I like to do is I get archivally safe acid-free paper from my art supply store. So check with your art supply store for that. Not everything in the craft store that says acid free and archivally safe is exactly that way. Okay. Because sometimes they use those terms, like we use the term organic in our food. Not always completely the case. But if you check with an actual art store, they're very specific about having archivally safe and acid-free stuff, because artists use that to put their beautiful work on so that it's preserved over time. So check. And what I do is I put all of that information and then I tuck it in. I roll it in with the quilt when it's being stored. That way, no matter whatever happens to me, somebody sees those quilts and has to do something with them. Somebody has to grab them. We're grabbing them because the house, God forbid, catches fire, because those quilts are coming with me. I have all that information in them. You could keep it in books, yeah, but how do you know which piece goes with which? You'll know, but who will know in the future, right? How will they know? So just put it on a piece of archival paper, roll it up in there, and you're set. You're good. They have that information. And that's super helpful for a preservationist, because when they go to examine the quilt, figure out what needs to be done to it, if anything, other than just preserving it, they'll have that information and they'll know what they can and can't try with that quilt. Okay. So document as much as possible. Now, also for storing, I find that if you don't have the room to roll your quilts and you don't have a spare bed, which is really the best way, lay those puppies flat on that spare bed and stack them up. You know, the Princess and the Pea, instead of having a dozen mattresses, you'll have a couple dozen quilts. You might have a stack just as high as those mattresses over your lifetime. That's really the best way, laying them flat, because no wrinkles, things like that. However, if you can't do that, an extra large or jumbo or whatever the company will call it, acid-free bridal box, the kind that we preserve our wedding gowns in, can be helpful. Please don't go just to Amazon.com and order something that says acid-free, because you can't be sure. Call the bridal shop in your town or call a preservationist and ask them if they know of a place. Or there's some companies online that specifically preserve bridal gowns and they guarantee their work and all this and that and the other. They might sell you some boxes, especially like if you say, I'm willing to buy like 10 or 12 of them, because my full size quilts, one per box. So what I do, now you would think, oh, but that's folding and all that. I don't fold. I drape it into the box with the tissue paper, or it's easy, a little bit easier to drape it into the box with muslin so that it's laying kind of loosey-goosey, more of a rolling than a flat fold. And I find that you can get less wrinkles in them. Things that are stored even in bridal boxes, though, I do try to take them out at least once a year, give them a shake, and then restore them, because that keeps things from setting in. Something has gone wrong. Maybe you didn't know there was a leak by where you were storing. You can find it, you can get it worked with, anything like that. Maybe you had a moth fly into that box when you were storing it and you didn't know about it. Oh my gosh. Okay. So those kinds of things. Now, I know that some preservationists will only work with gloves on. That is how I work as a preservationist. If you were to send me your quilt and say, I need this preserved, that's how I do it. Because all of our hands, even when they're washed, still has acid on them. That's just the nature of our skin. It's how skin is. So I will use little white cotton gloves. Sometimes when you buy the bridal boxes, they come with those gloves and with the acid-free tissue paper. And if you get your boxes and all those sets from reputable places that guarantee their work, you can probably say, yes, that tissue paper is going to be acid-free and it would be okay to work with. But the other thing I like, especially with rolling, is I just go and buy bolts of a thin muslin, just like this. And I roll them onto a thin muslin. Fabric on fabric, I feel, is better than fabric and paper, because of the way paper is created, even acid-free paper. So I get, now, not all muslin is made equal. Make sure you're getting a really top quality muslin that was created in an acid-free archival environment. You can find them out there. You will spend some money for these kinds of products, but those quilts are going to be around for generations. So it's so worth it, right? So speaking of acid-free tissue paper, which I do use, especially for smaller projects, the one where I like to get mine is from the Linen Lady. Oops, that's still a capital. It should be a small letter, lowercase. The Linen Lady. And there is the Linen Lady website, and I'll link it below. She is an archivist, and that's how she preserves her own things. And I've never had a problem with her tissue paper. Okay. I'm not linked to her. She probably has no idea who I am, just another customer. Actually, I haven't ordered directly from her. I've ordered through somebody else to get her paper. So, you know, I find it to be the best tissue paper out there. And so you can get that at her website. You can ask if it gets sold at your fabric shop, or if your fabric shop could find it for you or something. But hers is the one that I know, I feel I can trust. And when I'm talking about my quilts, I do the research to make sure that I can trust the products that I'm buying. So that is the idea around preserving and things like that. That's a small amount. We could do like a week-long lecture on just preservation. When I took some classes on museum quality preservation at a university, it was like a whole semester class. And we learned a lot. But these are the things I think that will be helpful for you at home. And start now as a new quilter or someone who has quilts that aren't even like at that 25 to 50 year mark. Start preserving your quilts now, and they will last for generations. Okay. Now, for cleaning, the one thing you can do, believe it or not, is do a little vacuuming of your older quilts, but be careful. Your hose, I like to take, ladies can buy knee-high socks that are like pantyhose nylons. I put one of those over the end and I get it on the lowest suction I can. And I lightly go over my quilts and areas. Now, my older quilts, someone gave me this idea and I have tried it and I like it. I went to my garden supply store and I bought a screen door mesh, a plastic screen door mesh. And I roll that out over the quilt and then I vacuum because I'm still getting the draw up, but I'm not sucking the fabric and I still keep that pantyhose over it. Clean pantyhose, please. I just have some that I just use for that. So that was a tip that I was given and it actually kind of works. But like I said, on really older quilts, unless you've got mildew going on and things like that because they've been sitting out in an old army trunk, you don't know how many quilts we find sitting out in old army trunks. Then those, seriously, if you have those, find a preservationist and take them to her and let her evaluate them before you do anything to them. So the next thing I want to talk about is, what if you've inherited an older quilt and it has a bit of a hole in it, or one of the seams are coming apart? And I see that lots and lots and lots. So the one thing I do is I will look at it and I will see how frayed the fabric might be. Has the thread completely disintegrated away? Is the fabric disintegrating, or was it a pull or something that caused that to happen? So I like using, again, a lightweight muslin to support that old fabric. And I do it just like a patch. I measure like maybe an inch larger all the way around where that hole is. And on my older quilts, because they were all done with cotton fiber thread, they were all done with cotton fabrics pretty much, I will hand stitch that in the smallest stitches I can, that patch underneath the fabric to preserve that area. That, once that happens, that becomes a quilt that doesn't get used. You can show it, you can bring it out and let people see it. You can lay it on a bed that isn't being used. But at that point, it's not a snuggle up in quilt because it's starting to deteriorate at that point, but you can preserve them. And a lot of folks want them preserved because they want to lay them out on beds so that people can see all of the beautiful work their grandmas or their great grandmas or their great aunts did, that kind of thing. So again, a very lightweight muslin, that archival quality muslin, that'll work fine for something like that. And then I just pretty much all of those old quilts were sewn in white or a light beige cotton thread. That's what I have, and I hand stitch them. And that's probably the only things I really hand stitch anymore. But you can preserve and fix little holes like that. For a while, I was backing some of those with a no-show mesh stabilizer. But the more I researched that, the more I realized those are made with chemicals and stuff. I don't want those in those older quilts. So I've stopped doing anything like that. And I've just gone back to using my muslin. It's really the best preservation material to do that. Okay, so that's that. Now I want to talk about, what if you've inherited blocks? Now recently, just in the last, month and a half or so, a dear friend of mine contacted me and said, Diana, I have found 13 quilt blocks. I think there's 13 of them here. They're old and they have hand stitching on them, hand embroidery on them. So I wanted to ask you, do you want them? Do you want first stitch of these? And so she sent me a picture and I said, absolutely. How much? I'll send it to you. And so we came on a price, and she mailed them to me. And this is one of them. Now, when you first see this, you're going to say, oh, look at that date, 1940. That must be a really, really, really old quilt. Well, it is heirloom age, but it wasn't made in the 40s. And that's something you have to investigate. She didn't know anything about these, who they had belonged to, nothing like that. But after I looked at all of these, I'll show you some more of them. You can see there's a name and probably a birth date and a town and a state on all of them. And some of them are the same woman. Now on this one, this looks like it's fading, but it's not. She's used a thread there that's variegated. So you're seeing the lighter variegation in the center. So that kind of threw me. So when you get things like this, it's a little bit of a treasure hunt and a little bit of a mystery to investigate. And so then I said, well, all of these dates on here, here is another one. I think that says 1940 on it. Aren't they beautiful? So I believe what these blocks were, they were either blocks from a guild that was putting together a friendship quilt and either had leftovers, because sometimes in a guild, if they don't have enough, they ask certain guild members, will you make a few of these because we need. Now, the fact that these have names and dates on them leads me to believe that someone just got really happy about making them with their own name and dates. Or what this could be is a family tree quilt that never got completed. And I tend to think maybe that's the case because there are some of them that are duplicates of the same person's name and date. And I thought, well, maybe when I looked closer, I thought, oh, these aren't all the same date, same person, but that looks like birth date, maybe a graduation date, maybe a wedding date. So it looks like to me that maybe these were leftovers or blocks that were being made for a family tree quilt that never got finished for whatever reason. I doubt that somebody put this much effort into these and just made this many extras. Sometimes we're getting older, we're making a quilt, there will be a quilt that goes unfinished. You know what I'm talking about. So maybe that was the case. But they have come into my possession now. And this is how I feel about blocks like this. I am now part of the history of these blocks. And my friend Carrie, who found them and got them to me, she is also a part of these blocks. So I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Because quilts have history. Quilts have lives. And so I got to looking at these dates thinking, good golly, 1934, 1940. And the fabrics look like they could be from that age because all of this cream fabric on every one of them is muslin. And that used to be really popular for quilts in that time, muslin. It was inexpensive, easy to find, and easy to cut with your scissors and piece by hand. But then I got to looking at the back, and this is what you'll want to do, or this is what your preservationist will do. I got to looking at the back of these blocks, and here is something you're going to want to get. Clip-on magnifiers if you wear glasses. If you don't, get yourself a magnifying glass. But I love these. I get them at Michael's. They're like $10. I slide them over my glasses, and now I can look under the light and really look at these blocks. This one is definitely hand stitched. And I can tell because nobody's stitches are absolutely perfect every single time. So this one and I will tell you, if anybody knows these people when I read out names, contact me at, where is it? Here we go. Contact me at supportandsewincommon.com. Tell me how you know them. Give me some proof, and we'll talk. This one is Lily Lockwood, 6/11/1934, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Can you imagine the life Lily has? She could still be with us. Could she? Yes, she could still be with us. Lily Lockwood. I love that name. Sounds like Lily Lockwood. Sounds like girl of mystery. Like she was one of those sleuthy type of girls, don't you think? I love to see stuff like this and think about who these people are or were and what their lives are like. But this one is definitely hand stitched. You're not going to be able to tell in this screen, but that's hand stitching. So this could be very, very old. All right, so I set Lily's aside. And then I looked at this next one. Violet Layton, 6/12/19, let me make sure, 1924, 6/12/1924, Hollywood, Florida. Beautiful, right? Violet Layton. Doesn't that sound like maybe a young teacher? Maybe. So down in Florida, I had apparently a couple of they would be my father's great aunt. No, they would be my father's, great aunts. So they would be my great great aunts. They were the first two ladies to have a business in Tampa, St. Petersburg, in the old downtown section. And they were hairstylists. One of them was actually Violet, I believe, too. That's kind of cool. But Violet Layton, Hollywood, Florida. So it sounds like maybe she was a librarian or a teacher, or maybe with a beautiful name like Violet, maybe she grew up to be a gardener, a horticulturist. Who knows what Violet did in her life. But I hope it was a good one. And so when I look at the back of this square, again, I can see, this is hand stitched. 1924, 1934. Okay. Now I'm looking at this one, Maura Stalter Miles. Wait. Maura Stalter Miles Khan, I think, January 15th, 1940. So this could be a wedding block because this looks like it's a guy and a gal and their wedding date from 1940. So again, I'm going to examine it. This block looks very old, but this has been sewn on a sewing machine because these stitches are not hand done. They're too perfect. So, well, that's interesting. So I started looking at all of these. I won't read out all of them. Now, I already read you somebody who is Lockwood, Lily Lockwood. Yeah, Lockwood. Now, here's one, Stella Lockwood, also Fort Lauderdale, 6/11/34. So Lily was 6/11/34. What's the chance that Lily and Stella are twins? Oh, now that's a cool one. So if Lily is the girl of mystery, what's Stella? What did Stella? Were they mystery girls together? Were they twins? Were they alike? Were they identical twins? Were they fraternal twins? I don't know. Maybe they were cousins born on the same day. Don't know, but they have the same birth date. And Stella's is definitely sewn by hand. So I bet the same person or each of these girls made these blocks at the same time. And when I look at the fabric here, these are very old vintage fabrics. Very old vintage fabric. In fact, I can see that could have been like an apron or a day dress at some point. I know I've seen fabrics like that. So I've gone through all of these and looked at them. And what I realized, now all of them have hand stitching, hand embroidery, beautifully done. Thank goodness I have an embroidery machine to do that for me today because I'm really bad at that. And these are done with like a handwriting idea. Oh my goodness. Now this one, Lila B. Gus, February 10th, 1940, Tucson, Arizona. Think that maybe Lila liked to ride horses? I know that's kind of silly, but maybe she was an artist out in Tucson. Who knows? But when I look at these, some of them are done by hand, some of them are done by sewing machine. So what I think might have happened is one of a couple of things. Either some of these got made way, way back by these young women and got put away and never got made. And then about the late 1970s, early 1980s, when we started using sewing machines, someone decided to do more of them for a family. That's my guess. I really thought this was going to be for a friendship quilt for a guild for a long time, but I'm really thinking it's a family heritage quilt. Now, these blocks were from. If you know any of these people, please let me know. Share this video, this part of this video, because I'm going to timestamp it with others, because if you know anything about these women, let me know, okay? Because their history is now in my hands, and I feel very, very obligated to share their history. So, getting back to myself and my friend Carrie being a part of that history, I am going to make 2 more blocks. They'll be done on the embroidery machine, a whole nother kind of way to piece and do the embroidery. But one is going to be my name and my birth date and where I was born. And one is going to be Carrie's name and her birth date and where she was born. That way, when I turn these into probably a nice size wall quilt, there we go. Now you're saying, can you, speaking of preservation, can you put these together still? I have looked at this fabric and I know it is cotton, and I'll tell you why I know that, because there's a little trick you can do. And I've looked at the edging, and yes, I think I could sew these together. I will use a finer needle. Normally I use like a 7511. I'm going to go with a much finer needle on my sewing machine. Go slowly. And I think I can sew these together on my machine. I'm going to try it on some of them that have been sewn by machine first. If it looks like it's going to cause a problem, then I'm going to hand stitch them. And I haven't done that in a while, but I'm going to, because I want to turn this into a quilt. Look at this one for Lillian L. Guess. Now we had another Guess in here, or Gus, sorry. Gus, we had Lila B. Gus, Tucson, Arizona, February 10th, 1940. This is Lillian L. Gus, Tucson, Arizona, February 10th, 1940. Is Lillian L. and Lila B. We could have another set of twins. I have to look at these more carefully. Maybe this family, like my family, we have twins in our family. My husband and I lost twins. My dad's a twin. My maybe we've got more twins running around here. But what I love about this one is not only did they did their names and all, look, they hand stitched a little cactus. Isn't that totally cool? I've washed my hands. Don't worry. I've washed my hands really good. Like I rubbed them raw before I touched those blocks. So this is going to end up being a quilt. If I can legitimately find a relative of one of these women, or if these women were in a guild together and they were working on something that never got completed, then after this is completely done, I will send it to them with my pleasure, with the blocks for Carrie and I added to it, because it's not my property in that way. It's their history. It's their story for their family or their guild. But if I can't, then this will become part of my archival place. I'll bring it out to show people and all, but this is getting older because even the blocks that were sewn by machine were probably sewn at least 40 years ago, if not 45 years ago, by the look of the fabric that it was sewn with. Okay. None of these fabrics are like fabrics from the 90s or the 80s, late 80s, 90s, early 2000s. None of them. They are all older. They are all fabrics from the 70s and earlier. So some of these might have been made back in the 50s, 60s, 70s is what I'm guessing. Or somebody, the other way this could have been done is these ladies got together in the 70s while these older ladies were still with us, still vibrant, still going strong. Some of them decided to try that new technique of doing your piecing on a sewing machine. Just like now we do that technique of piecing our quilts on our embroidery machine. And somebody said, like a lady that used to quilt with my grandma, no, I'll never do anything but hand quilting. That's fine. Oh, there was a lady. Oh, she was a pistol. She would just eat me up whenever I took a class of piecing with my sewing machine right after Dave and I got married back in the earliest of the 80s. And she told my grandmother, she said, she can't call herself a quilter anymore. She's no, silly. But some people feel that strongly about preserving older techniques. So I get that. My grandma just said, honey, use the techniques you got. You got a busy life, sweetheart. Just use that sewing machine if you want to. So I think that maybe that might be what happened. Or some of them are older and then they added them too. I don't know. But if you know, I'm going to read these ladies off to you really quick in case anybody knows them. Lillian R. Gus, Tucson, Arizona. Lila B. Gus, Tucson, Arizona. Josephine Neal Bennington, from Bennington, Kansas. Sorry, Bennington, Kansas. Josephine Neal, N-E-I-L-L, if you're wondering about a spelling. Stella Lockwood, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Who were you, Stella Lockwood? I would have liked to have known you. Lillian Lockwood, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I would have liked to known you too, Lily. I would have liked to known all these. Violet Layton, Hollywood, Florida. Maura Stalter and Mike Kahn, K-A-N-N. And no, oh, wait a minute. No, not Mike Kahn. Sorry, let me go back on this one. Oh, I think what this is Maura Stalter, Miles, Kansas. That's what that is. Excuse me, Miles, Kansas. Okay. So probably not a wedding, it's a birthday one. Josie M. Gus, Tucson, Arizona. Oh, and look at this one. Cute little things. Oh, no, sorry. Sorry, that's the husband. He doesn't get to interrupt the filming. He'll be upset that he did. Let me turn that down. I'm turning my phone all the way off. All right, here we go. We'll keep going. Emma M. Phillips. Dania, Florida, D-A-N-I-A, Florida. Don't know that one. 1935. Minnie Bell Redmond, Fort Lauderdale Forward. Minnie Bell. Oh, I love that. Minnie Bell. I would have loved to have known her. I hope they called her Minnie Bell and not just Minnie, because I think Minnie Bell. I love that. I love that name. Gladys Phillips. Again, Dania, Florida. D-A-N-I-A. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Florida. And just a couple more. And I'm reading these off in case anybody knows anything about them. Oh, this one's interesting. Elmer Leroy Redmond. Now, didn't we just have a Redmond? We did. That was Minnie Bell. March 19th, 1935. March 19th, 1935. So I'm wondering if Elmer and Minnie Bell were married. Maybe. Are these? Yep, hand stitched. Hand stitched. Okay. I think Elmer might be the only gentleman. Well, here's another. Avis Lockwood, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Husband, brother, maybe, of the two girls. And then this is the last one. Okay, let me. Hattie Poland, maybe. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Well, that's a whole different one. And that, oh, now this is interesting. (1911). That's got to be the oldest one. Maybe part of the family that started out back in Pennsylvania. Don't know. Cool. If you know any of those people, please let me know. Okay, I'd appreciate it. So anyway, if you have blocks like this, you need to go through them. You need to figure out what are they made out of. And there's a really simple way to make sure that they are actually cotton, which you can pretty much, because they're all going to have little frays on the back. So I want you to go in with your very sharpest, where are mine? Oh, they're there. With your very sharpest scissors and find a little clump of the threads that have frayed and just snip them, just like that. I keep a tin candy can lid around, and I want you to put them in there. And then I want you to take a lighter fire starter and put it. Those just right away. I know that that's cotton. And they smell like it. If they do something like they don't just burn up, but they start to smolder or melt, it's very likely that fabric is polyester, and that is a more 1970s, 1980s maybe quilt, something like that. Always do that around a sink, guys, if you're testing fibers like that. So that's how I test them. And yes, I believe these can be put into a quilt. Now, when I go to quilt this, I'll hand quilt it. I won't quilt it on my embroidery machine. I don't want my hoop laying on it. I don't want the fastness and the heat created by the needle. I'm going to do it by hand. So this is going to be a project for me, probably over a year. But I'm going to get it done. So I have a while to do my mystery, my digging to see if I can find out who did it. But those are the things that you should look for. Okay. If your blocks have holes in them or stains on them when you get them, again, take them to a preservationist. They can help you with that. And instead of just dropping them off and leaving them, sit with them, have see what they do, see how they figure it out, so you'll know for future. Now, the last thing I want to talk about real quickly are quilt labels. So like I told you before, we didn't do a lot of quilt labels when my grandmother and I made that quilt. In fact, I don't have a single quilt for my grandmother that has a label on it. She never even taught me about labels, never heard about labels until a certain couple of ladies started doing quilts out in Iowa. Very famous. I won't mention them. I don't like to mention names. And they started creating this idea that every quilt must have a label. I am of two schools of thought on that. I think every quilt should be documented more than just having a quilt label. But a quilt label is quite important. And today with our embroidery machines or sewing machines, they're really easy to add on. However, I think today we go a little bit overboard on what we put on them. I know people that put who quilted it, who pieced it, what it was for. Then they put like paragraphs on there. I think that's overkill. That's the stuff you put in the documentation, because even if you do a quilt label, you should document on archival paper to keep with the quilt. All I put on my quilt labels is maybe made for by, made with love by Aunt Diana, made with love by Diana, for my family, made with love by Dee, made for you with love, something like that. And then I put the date it was given and who it was given to. So let me just pick, we'll pick my husband, Dave. Made for you with love from Diana. And then I could like put in there in quotes, your wife. April 1st, 1992. I'm making all this up. For Dave Atkinson, Diana's husband. And that's all I would put on there. If it was for a special occasion, made for you with love on the date of your graduation, June 10th, 2023, from Aunt Diana, from Aunt Susan, from Mom, whatever. I just make sure that my name, the date, and the recipient's name is on there. That's really all that needs to be on there. If you are someone that really loves making quilt labels and you love putting all that information on there, do yourself a favor, knock yourself out and do them. But document it on archival paper as well, because you are putting those labels on with thread and fabric, and they will wear out over time, like the rest of that quilt over time. So document them. Now, I also keep documentation in a file on my computer. So I have a couple of places where my documentation is, but document somewhere other than just on the label of the quilt, and keep that label nice and fresh looking. On the back, if you put it on the back, I don't put my quilt labels on the back. I put them in the bottom front corner, either the left or the right, typically on the right side. That's where I put my labels so that people can see them right away and go, oh, look, this was made for Jacob by Aunt Lillian, whatever, right? So I like putting the labels on the front. All right, folks, that is our video for this week on a little bit of preservation and more of our quilts. There's a lot more we could discuss. There are a lot of other things people do. There are a lot of other things that people say they will never do. As an actual preservationist, I wanted to bring you some of the things that I know that I do as a preservationist were things that I learned in my preservation classwork. If I wanted, I could go work as a preservationist at a museum. Could be a fun job someday. But for now, I use that information mainly to help preserve beautiful older quilts and modern quilts as well. So I hope that was helpful for everybody. I just want to tell you one thing. before we go is that we have just started our quilt along. It's completely free. It is the Starlight Starbright Quilt Along. Everything you need is available for free on our website, sewincommon.com. Remember, it's pieced with your embroidery machine. You need a 5x7 hoop. The information sheets are out there. The patterns are out there, all free. And there's a video for week 1, and there are some countdown videos I did as well, so that you could be caught up and ready to go with this. And we're having a really good giveaway. So you're going to want to watch Countdown Day 3 and Countdown Day 2 to learn all of, and the, not Countdown Day 3 and the first week video to find out all the really good stuff about the giveaway. So I hope you all enjoyed. I hope it answered some of your questions. You can always leave me your comments and questions here on this video. And you can, of course, send me any email that you like at support@sewincommon.com, and I'll be happy to get back with you. Now, I would also like to ask you one more favor. If you have not already subscribed to our Sew in Common channel, would you please do that? Click the subscribe button, click the little bell to set your notifications. We would love to have you as part of the Sew in Common family. We're growing by leaps and bounds. We're over 35,000 Sew in Common family members now. So we would love to have you as part of that group. There's always more room. And until next time, everybody, as I always say, because I believe it from my heart, go sew life beautiful by making a beautiful quilt this week or starting a beautiful quilt this week. Bye for now.